Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Isle of the Crimson Skull, and we are playing a bit of High Elf against Dwarf gameplay. And so the Dwarves don't have the Dwarves and High Elves are actually, I think, a fairly evenly matched game. The biggest problem for the High Elves is, of course, their shooting, which they often kind of rely upon as almost a crutch, is practically irrelevant against dwarves. And with the changes to the Thanes and the fact that their infantry is pretty susceptible to slayers, or their cavalry, sorry, is very susceptible to slayers, they definitely struggle a little bit to get into the backline. So what I decided to do here is make a build that doesn't care about getting into the backline. I'm simply going to envelop my opponent, swamp him with infantry, and win that way. And so we're going very wide with white lines of Krace. I did bring, as you can see, 6 units of white lines from my front line, backed by Tyrion on a horse. Tyrion, of course, this way he'll be rather mobile. He still has all of his great stats. He does have a great feint and a post. He does have stand your ground, of course, and he does have Sunfang as well as the Heart of Avalon, which gives him a huge burst of healing. And Sunfang, of course, could still do a little bit of damage to the dwarves. I did want to give it a shot and just see how well it would perform. Alongside that, he also does have some okay, if not amazing, he does have a little bit of missile resistance at 15%, and with 125 armor on top of that, and the fact that dwarves do tend to bring quarrelers to counter battery elvish shooting, pretty decent. From behind that, I do have 3 units of Swordmasters of Hoeth, just to provide some extra armor-piercing punch if I need to cut through hammers or iron breakers or those sorts of high-end units. Because in that situation, the white lines of Krace will not quite do. Finally, I do have a Loremaster of Hoeth. I did bring Harmonic Convergence. I was thinking about bringing Wissen's Wild Form, but then decided against it because I was just a little shy on points. He does, of course, have Evasion. He does have Harmonic Convergence, Spirit Leech, as well as Earthblood. And the cool thing about the Loremaster of Hoeth is that he actually has like really good melee stats. He's got amazing weapon strength, which is armor 360 with armor piercing, and bonus against infantry, great melee attack, great melee defense, and 90 armor with a bronze shield. Though it is only a 20 shield, not a 35% shield like most bronze shields are. So same shield as the Swordmasters have. And of course, in the front line, you do want your white lines of Krace because they are cheaper, they're squishy, a little squishier, granted. But they also do have 30% missile resistance, which is going to protect you against explosives, and oftentimes dwarves do bring blasting charges of one form or another. For my opponent's front line, he did decide to go much less wide. The numbers definitely tell the tale. I outnumber him by a decent amount, by about I have about 50% more troops than he does, but he does have a very potent front line nonetheless. 2 Longbeards kind of anchor it with psychological immunity and then encourage effect. They do have Dwarf Warriors, 2 units of Hammers as well, and the Hammers, of course, will trade really, really effectively against my Swordmasters. Though I do believe the Swordmasters will still come out on top in a straight up 1v1. Beyond that, my opponent does have a Thane with, of course, the Tormentor Sword, because you need that lockdown. Interestingly enough, he did bring Foe Seeker and good old Deadly Onslaught. Strangely enough, also no Master Rune of, I do believe, it's Strong Redbeard, so no buffs to my opponent's melee attack. Now you can see the artillery is already going off. He does also have a unit of Dwarf Warriors, great weapons, definitely going a little cheap here in the center. But these guys can nonetheless do a little bit of damage, especially the white lions. And that Thorgrim Grudgebearer, of course, with good old Stand Your Ground, as well as a decent amount of buffs. He does, of course, have the High King buff, which gives Frenzy when his morale drops below a certain point. Actually, it seems to affect whatever is below 50% HP, 50% morale, but he is disabled when his HP is below 50%, so my bad there. Great Book of Grudges, of course, plus 9 melee attack is great, and then Stand Your Ground. Finally, he does have a Runesmith for the main portion of his hero goon squad here, and the Runesmith, of course, built all of his runes, which is a little interesting because the Rune of Oath and Steel is not going to help a lot against High Elves. Regardless, you can see the shots are going in, and my opponent is, of course, going to focus one of my Swordmasters almost immediately because they're the high priority target. But in his backline, my opponent does have a unit of Veteraned Up Slayers. Slayers, of course, can chop up if I brought lighter infantry, they'd chop through them really easily, and they can deal with large stuff very, very effectively. He does, of course, have Iron Tricks with Troll Hammer Torpedoes, which is probably the only questionable pick in this build. These guys, though, do have a strong post against large, and they can definitely dish out some hurt to light infantry or heavily armored infantry if they hit. Behind that, an Organ Gun, which can do some nasty damage, and of course the Goblobber for that demoralization effect. I'm really pushing forward with Tyrion, trying to get a nice Sunfang off. You can see the Organ Gun is just annihilating these poor Swordmasters, and I can't really do anything. I'm not really bothering with a heal, because if I do, and unfortunately I make a bit of a miscast here. I misclicked and blew a 135-second cooldown for no effect. And I did take actually a nasty volley from the Iron Drakes. You can see they knocked down Tyrion by a good couple hundred, if not over 1,000 HP. Not entirely sure where Tyrion started. He started at 3,600, so he lost about 700 HP there. However, our front lines are closing. The only unit that's been mauled really badly is this unit of Swordmasters, which is of course not ideal. But I do not intend to kind of heal them before they've reached the fight, because I really don't. I want to maximize the healing once they're because otherwise they're just going to be losing models. And so far you can see they took a meaty hit there. Fortunately, they are very wide right now, so my opponent's not really able to kind of collapse on them that effectively, or sorry, blow them up with artillery that effectively. You can see Runesmith is popping a bunch of runes. He's getting hit by Stench Ground, which is a little premature, I think. And you can see the charge does go in, and you can see the White Lines of Grace are going to hack through these Dwarf warriors very quickly. I also do cast an Earthblood. Swordmasters are in. They're going to chop through the hammers very efficiently, especially with the backing of the Loremaster of Hoth, who's throwing in as well, just to dish out a little more hurt. In the meantime, over here, Tyrion is helping cut through the Longbeards. The Longbeards are not going to hold up very well, especially not against these sort of backed up units. You can see over on this flank, we have kind of gotten a development. These hammers are collapsing rather quickly. Hammers don't have the best of melee defense, especially not by dwarf standards, so they're suffering quite a bit here. Unfortunately, my opponent's backline is still firing, and I didn't really focus enough on shutting down the artillery pieces, and you can see they're just cutting bloody swaths through my white lines. Over here, I do get Tyrion on Thorgrim Grudgebearer, who has a massive HP pool, but he has much inferior stats, or, well, not that much inferior stats, but he does have inferior stats to Tyrion, and Tyrion can kind of eventually womp him down, is my hope. I do get another Earthblood off, and the Swordmasters are finally hacked through most of these hammers most of the way, obviously with some help from the White Lines, and now that with the hammers routing off, I'm going to be able to hopefully collapse on my opponent's flank here. Unfortunately, these White Lines are having their morale is wavering, and that's falling apart because of the focus fire from the Goblobber, and they are actually going to rout, which is definitely a little bit of a problem. In the meantime, over here, the White Lines are still holding their ground, chopping through the Longbeards. It's going to take them a while to chop through the Longbeards, who have huge melee defense, but at the same time, the Longbeards can't do very much damage in return, so most of the damage being done here is by the Thane. Over here, Tyrion is still kicking around, trying to beat down Thorgrim. You can see he's doing a decent amount of work. He hasn't really lost much HP, and Thorgrim's definitely getting smacked down. And finally, I'm getting Swordmasters into my opponent's backline. Even though this unit, of course, got routed off, it will be able to come back, and in the meantime, the Organ Gun's going to get swamped and massacred. Definitely a little bit of mismanagement, though, on my part. I could have easily gotten these White Lines into the back line and wiped it out much sooner, and avoided a good chunk of these casualties. Meantime, my Loremaster is being pursued. He gets hit by a Tormentor's Sword. Definitely a bit of a problem, because over here the Swordmasters are trying to chop down the Runesmith, doing an okay job of it, though with the Tormentor's Sword affecting, it's not going to go too well. So I do pop a Harmonic Convergence here just to keep my Loremaster around and kicking. The Loremaster is, of course, not a pushover in melee. With 75 melee defense and all that sort of stuff, he's very potent. In the meantime, the White Lions are just hacking their way through the back line. They got on top of the Goblobber. Goblobber's not going to be long for this world. You can see the Longbeards over here collapsing, and definitely one of the problems for my opponent is that he didn't have that much armor piercing in his front line. The armor piercing, only the hammers really were a decent counter to my troops, and they didn't get like a melee buff. Finally, these Longbeards do break down to 5 models. So obviously the old classic dwarves don't break until the very end, and I'm going to be able to collapse though on these tops of these Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes. In the meantime, some hammers are recovering, kind of regrouping here, and trying to push back into the fray, but I'm getting on top of these Iron Drakes, shutting them down, which would be a big win for me. Over here, Tyrion, with Faint and Post off, is chasing Thorgrim and beating the snot out of him, doing rather well with the help of the Loremaster of Hoth, of course, who does have armor piercing. Those bonus against large is not kicking, or bonus against infantry is not kicking in here, because Thorgrim is actually, I do believe, a large unit. It's one of the few dwarf large units. I do get another Sunfang here, and it melts these hammers, and that really only leaves the Iron Drakes and these hammers over here. These hammers are wavering. I'm going to be able to get a rear charge if I really wanted to, though I decided against it. I'm instead chase after the Thane. And in the meantime, my opponent's hero squad has kind of broken. You can see the Runesmith over here is routing, as my Victorious Infantry, which is pretty badly mauled, but my Victorious Infantry is kind of running around. So I think this is actually a pretty decent build against dwarves. Perhaps a little bit of shooting would be recommended if you need to deal with gyrocopters, or perhaps bring a lord on a dragon instead of one of the White Lions is not necessarily a bad thing. But against dwarves who can't really flee from you, going very heavily into heavy infantry with a huge armor piercing and monstrous anti-infantry bonuses is not a bad idea. Now, you don't want to go with straight Swordmasters of Hoth, because they're rather expensive, and of course the dwarves can bring Runes of Wrath and Ruin. Perhaps if you were going for build with regrowth, it would be a little more viable, but the Loremaster of Hoth is honestly a really powerful pick in this as well, because he does have that bonus against infantry. He's no pushover in melee, and at the same time he can provide all those buff spells. I definitely think that perhaps a better idea for me in that game as well would have been to bring Wiston's Wild Form, because that extra weapon strength would have been huge, chopping through those dwarves. But I definitely think this sort of build is completely functional against dwarves, because dwarves really can't quite match you in the straight up sort of brawl. The white lines of crates can still, while they definitely will not win against hammers, they still do enough damage and hit consistently enough against hammers to be able to do a decent amount of damage to them. And they also provide you with a sort of shield for your swordmasters, and then the swordmasters can push in behind them and just dice through everything the dwarves have. I definitely think it's not a I definitely don't think this is a necessarily bad build. The only, of course, you are susceptible though to good old gyrocopter play, so you got to watch out for that. But other than that, you're basically golden, completely functional, I think. As far as my opponent's build, I definitely don't think it was necessarily a bad build, though the reliance on artillery is a little questionable. I'm not generally artillery is not something you want to rely on, though the organ gun has been buffed and is much more competitive now. You can see the artillery did a good amount of damage, but that largely came down to my incompetence because I did not push around the flank and go after them with one of my units of white lines. And that meant those white lines instead just took a pounding and ended up routing off. The Iron Drakes are the other somewhat questionable pick. Generally, I think that my opponent would have been better off bringing like a few squads of Thunderers. Perhaps I do believe you could fit. Yeah, you could get 3 in exchange for the Iron Drakes and the Organ Gun. I do believe. Godlobber is a decent choice, I think, usually, just because for that demoralization effect, if nothing else. But nonetheless, I definitely think there were some changes that could have been made. Of course, the Thane could have brought the Master and Astronomy Redbeard, which would have been huge in the front line fight. Obviously, the Dwarves do have to bring some Slayers. They do have to bring some sort of crowd control because if High Elves bring Cavalry, you're doomed. But definitely a pretty cool build. I'm not the biggest fan of Thorgrim either. Thorgrim does have those pretty cool High King buffs and all that sort of stuff, but he's not the best of melee combatants, and he can definitely get dragged into the mud and kind of murdered. He doesn't get knocked around, which actually was a disadvantage in that fight against Tyrion, because Tyrion was able to just keep wailing on him, and Thorgrim couldn't really shake him. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. Definitely had a lot of fun running this sort of fairly monoblock build, but it was fun. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.